If there were a manual for life, the guy in me would resist following it. I'm Andrea Leigh, and this is The Andrea Leigh Show. I titled today's episode Musk, Masks, and Another Interesting Perspective That's Uniquely Andrea's. I think you'll find it fascinating what we wade through today. We're going to cover 2 to 3 topics. Let's first start with Musk. It is fascinating what we are seeing occur in the United States. We have just come through a polarizing election, and we are now watching programs in the government be dismantled at a pace that nobody thought was possible. And at the center of it all is Elon Musk. Quite an interesting character. For years, I was indifferent to Elon Musk. My relationship to him was one that was just based on knowing that he was the head of Tesla, the electric car manufacturer, which I found amazing, but I was always a Corvette guy. So electric cars did not appeal to me with that mindset. I then became a Corvette girl. I have neither anymore. Both of the cars I have since sold, but I found them an extreme joy to own, and I love the power and the speed. So the appeal of an electric car wasn't necessarily there. I think that's mostly just my perspective and a lack of experience with the Tesla, and I'm quite impressed with it and its performance. Now, I don't hold an opinion on him from a political standpoint other than to find it rather fascinating to have his hands as an advisor to President Trump. I do not believe, I'm pretty certain he is not an employee of the Department of Government Efficiency. I believe he is acting as an advisor and he's not an employee of the United States. Nevertheless, I find that really fascinating to what he is doing as far as it relates to finding government inefficiencies, at which is being done at a record pace, and it's quite amazing. Now, a lot of his polarizing aspects, I believe, are really generated from the need to have an opinion by those in our culture. Our culture almost demands that we have an opinion on everything. That's why I think it's actually a worthwhile goal to actually withhold that opinion from people and seek to understand, not always be understood. I was raised in a way that it was more important. Relationships with friends and family were more important than them knowing where I stood politically or where my family stood politically. It wasn't going to make a difference in typically their opinions, but it could possibly hurt the relationship. And I grew up in a way that I was told the relationships were important, and I think they are now. If for no other reason than simply seeking to understand the viewpoint of other people is worthwhile. I think that's one of the reasons I'm here doing this show, is to give you a very interesting perspective from somebody that you don't hear from every day. And that is, you know, my story, that former 30-year pharmaceutical sales executive that has experience in cattle ranching, motorcycling, the sport of triathlon, Christian apologetics, and then becoming a fashionista and an author and a speaker and whatever else is in store. So it's a very unique perspective that I hold alone. And I'm happily married for over 22 years with a nice family and wonderful parents. So I have this very interesting background and perspective that is unique to me. As far as Elon Musk is concerned, I think it's very fascinating that we've asked for this for a long time as a culture. We would play with that. We would play with the thought of, gosh, wouldn't it be great to have a business person in charge of the government and run it like a business? Well, at least with this efficiency program that's underway, we are seeing what that might look like. I think coming out of the election, there are programs that are being hit first. To make news, we know where the inefficiencies were, and so to see them taken down and dismantled is great. A lot of the Democrat Party doesn't like that, but I think that they didn't know how to stop that. So we could be generous and just say that seeing some of the programs that they created and fostered be dismantled might be a little bit disturbing. I'll withhold judgment on how much kickbacks would come out of those programs straight back into their own pocket, but that probably isn't too far off of the mark. So what Elon Musk is doing may very well appeal to the right at the current time and be a little threatening to the left. I believe it's going to be interesting to see how the sides respond as he moves his way. And I'm using him as a point of contact in effect for what the DOGE program is doing, the Department of Government Efficiency. I'll just use Musk as the one in charge of that. But it's it's DOGE program that's going through this. It might be really interesting to see as they make their way into departments like the Department of Defense to see how the reaction of the right and the Republican Party responds to what they find there. We might see something a little bit more measured, because I think now that they see that the public is really rather fond of what's been found and being dismantled, they might not throw such a fit. I think the Democrats are actually tempering their response a little bit because of how favorable this is being viewed from the public in general. So back to Elon Musk for a moment. I think it's so fascinating to see someone that has run companies like Tesla and has made strides there to bring a vehicle to the public that is widely accepted. My goodness, you should see how many Teslas there are on the highways in Dallas. It is amazing. I think it's also amazing to see what's happened with SpaceX and the rocket program and the usage of returnable boosters. To me, that is absolutely mind-blowing to see a cylinder the size of a booster return back to Earth and be grabbed by what amounts to a giant pair of chopsticks to grab it right out of the air as it lowers itself with under its own power. Absolutely fascinating to me. So he's quite an eccentric person. He's got lots of children. He's been married numerous times. There's absolutely no judgment from my part on that. I just don't think he fits a stereotype that's easy to label. So I think the opinions that are formed by him tend to revolve around what he's currently got his fingers in at the time. I'm finding it comfortable to just enjoy what he does and having someone of that intellect actually working for what appears to be the betterment of culture, at least in the way he sees it. So it's fascinating. This is Andrea Leigh, and this is the Andrea Leigh Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So how do we transition? Ooh, there's that word again. How do I get from Musk to masks? Only because it was closely related. And it provides us a transition to get into a unique, interesting perspective that I hold alone. The masks transition us from one way we are polarized regarding Elon Musk and what he's doing right now along left and right and ideological divides over to masks. What an amazing representation of political divide the mask was, I believe, after we realized that they were fairly ineffective and they represented more of what you thought politically. It was a way to self-identify. That's interesting, how much we feel like we have to self-identify and, again, let our opinions be known. But masks were a way to do that. Obviously, there was some fear about COVID and the effect of COVID could have acutely with somebody that was compromised or could potentially get sick, and then just what kind of benefit that they could offer if you had to be out and around. But the masks became fairly representative of a political ideology. They were also a sign of compliance, which was interesting to see. And when we come to compliance, regarding COVID, we come around to the vaccine. And this is an interesting point I get asked about, because I have a relationship with the pharmaceutical industry of having had worked there for over 30 years. So what was my relationship with that? Well, it's very interesting. So let's talk about that. But it's going to be from a perspective that you haven't quite heard before, I don't believe. Let's go to hormone replacement therapy for women. In the early 2000s, there were studies being done on the effectiveness of hormone replacement therapy with women with and without a uterus, and the effects of that, positive and negative. There was one wing of the study that was released that showed that the potential risk outweighed the benefit of hormone replacement therapy. And the wing of that study was women that were taking estrogen and progestin. And what it showed was that there was an increased risk in potential cardiovascular risks, and that outweighed the benefit of that. That's all I'm going to get into. I don't need to go any deeper. It's incredibly complicated. And it changed how we treat or use hormone replacement therapy. No argument there. None. The therapeutic area I worked in at the time was responsible for communicating those findings to the medical field, to the doctors that would be using hormone replacement therapy in their patients. So I had a fairly good understanding of the risk-benefit profile. Now, this is one of the places where I think God was smiling as to what would be coming 15 years later, 10 to 15 years later, as I transitioned from a guy working in women's healthcare in a pharmaceutical industry to 15 years later leaving my cattle and my motorcycles to become a fashionista and on HRT myself. What a fascinating perspective. So I found myself 10 years later with a good understanding of hormone replacement therapy and its usage in women, the risk and benefit of that, and then using hormone replacement therapy myself. Wasn't really a replacement. It was the actual taking of female hormones to affect the changes in me as I made a transition from a guy to a girl. Now, the benefit of that would be that there would be an effect, the emotional effects and the actual effects in one's thinking, that in layman's terms, you think more like a woman than you do a guy. And that's been a humorous topic of discussion around my house and how those effects manifested. But then also the physical changes that result from taking female hormones in part of a transition from a guy to a girl. And I did that. Now, the interesting thing is that the dosages that you do to affect changes from moving from a guy to a girl, as you can imagine, there's no surprise here. And you guys that watch this probably very minimal knowledge of this, is that the doses are incredibly higher than what a woman would take to affect small changes in her hormone replacement therapy. The hormone dosages I use are rather high in relation to what I was just talking about. But they were accounted for. the benefit to me of those dosages I was taking compared to the risk was acceptable. Okay. Now, they were also much, much, much higher than was seen years previously in that Women's Health Initiative study, where the certain wings of the study showed some risk-benefit profile that raised eyebrows and changed the course of treatment for women with hormone replacement therapy. So I had this understanding that and the risks that were entailed. Now we come to COVID and the vaccine. At this point in time, I had been on my hormone regimen for a number of years to affect the changes I want to affect, with the full understanding of the risk-benefit profile that I was dealing with. And then COVID hit. And when COVID came about, there was no thought to the disease itself and how that would affect me personally more or less than anybody else. But the vaccine followed. And I was in the industry. So there was an opportunity to take the vaccine. Now, being in the healthcare industry and being in clinics and being around hospitals and the healthcare arena, that was something that was encouraged. Obviously, you guys know that. You saw healthcare workers being laid off every day, displaced, terminated for their lack of adherence to the vaccine. I worked for a pharmaceutical company that was instrumental in the development of one of the vaccines. And so there was an offer made to the employees that you can take the vaccine. We'll offer it to you as part of your employee benefit. We'll make it available to you and you can take it. And I politely declined because there was at the time very little understanding of the effects, long-term effects, or any of the effects of the vaccine, other than what the companies had told us at the time, that it offered protection of some sort. And it was always a vague understanding of what was communicated. And I politely declined that because I knew that with something like that, an mRNA vaccine, there was going to be effects that were unknown when it was authorized for emergency use. I had my own regimen that for myself, that therapy, if you will, for lack of a better word, that I was engaged in offered enough risk for a lifetime that I was engaged in. So I politely declined, and the company said, that's fine. They later came back within a couple of months and said, we'd really like to see compliance increased within the company to a certain percentage. I believe it was 80% compliance within the company to take the vaccine. I politely declined that again. My reasons hadn't changed. And I was offered that if you don't want to do the vaccine, you can undergo testing so that you'll know whether to leave the field or you'll leave your place of work. You don't want to expose people to the perception of risk or any risk of COVID. So I underwent testing for that, and I was tested twice a week. Within a short period of time, the compliance levels had reached 80% within the company, and they wanted a higher compliance rate, so they increased to 90% desired compliance rate. And I politely declined again, and the required testing picked up. At which point they received the 90% compliance rate that they had desired, and a policy change came down that said we would like to see 100% compliance within our company, and testing is no longer an option. You'll be terminated if you have not taken the 2 shots, the first and the second booster. I announced my retirement from the company because I knew the risks of the therapy I was already engaged in, which was, relatively speaking, astronomical doses of female hormones to affect a physical and somewhat mental transition to living life as a woman from being a guy. So I announced my retirement, but the word never came down. The termination date never came down. Months went by. We were wondering, as a family, what was going on. I was wondering what was going on with my career because it was highly unlikely I would resume my career in an industry where COVID was currently the hot topic of discussion, and everything in the way the industry operated at the time was certainly taking COVID into account. The company reorganized the divisions I was in. I survived those reorganizations. There would be no severance plan. And shortly after the turmoil of reorganization within the company was completed, was over, then I received my termination date, my last day. Now, there was an option of being given an accommodation based on medical reasons, and you could submit for that, or religious beliefs. I was relieved because I knew the risks of what I was already engaged in would make medical sense as to why I would not take the vaccine as part of a company-wide mandate. I submitted all the paperwork, and I submitted the results of the Women's Health Initiative and my own medical history as a reason, with the understanding and communicating that the dosages that I was currently on, were significantly higher than what the Women's Health Initiative showed. Now, the Women's Health Initiative and the drugs that were used in that were drugs that were under the patent of the company I worked for. So I thought, well, clearly this will be accommodated. This is a clear medical risk that she's already engaged in, and she can be accommodated as a good reason to not take the vaccine. But the response that came back said, well, there's no evidence of any increased risk with the use of the vaccine and the HRT. My thought was, of course there wasn't. It hadn't been studied. So I submitted it one more time with a little bit more information, and I was denied again. So I found this very interesting, that I was left with seeking a religious accommodation, and I wasn't affiliated with any religious organization or any ideology or theology that was against vaccines, and I wasn't going to claim as such to avoid what the company wanted me to do. I thought that I had enough understanding. But I did have enough of a faith in what my purpose was in my life, my meaning and purpose, and what God wanted for me, at least in the way I saw it. So I submitted that. No theological grounds or anything like that. I just submitted that. And on my last day, I was accommodated. I received an email saying, you have been accommodated. Fascinating to me, and a relief. Within a couple of hours, I had received something else that was amazing. It was an offer to take a leadership position within the fashion industry. It was an opportunity that I wasn't going to pass up with where I currently was in my life, which was still barely coming out of home restriction, virtual workspace, that kind of life, and enjoying a love of fashion and having success there. I said yes to the accommodation. Over the course of 2 months, I was able to say thanks but no thanks as the change in industry developed and came to fruition. And it offered me an amazing perspective of sticking to belief system, standing for something, having it play out. Wasn't easy, but it helped me gain another experience. And again, as you'll hear through these podcasts over and over again, is that the meaning and purpose of life is found in the experience of it. And you must say yes to new experiences to maximize that. I had said yes to a new industry and experience. I had said yes to holding to my core principles and what I knew was right for me with the hormone replacement therapy I was undergoing and the vaccine. A very unique perspective that other people just didn't have. It wasn't as simple as saying I'm vaxxer or anti-vaxxer and then picking a side based on ideology. It was my own unique experience. And as it all ended, I realized that I had been tested 87 times. Thanks, but no thanks. I'm Andrea Leigh. We'll be right back. Perspective. I wanted to give you guys just a little bit of perspective that we are all such unique individuals. We're all fragile little people with fragile lives, but we are highly resilient. I want you to move forward with that. Fragile people that are highly resilient. You see it every day, and we're always impressed by it. You guys have a great couple of days. Until next time, this is the Andrea Leigh Show.